Welcome to Reinventing-U. I'm your host, Danielle Silverman. I believe that in today's world of ever-constant evolution, the only career change that matters is when what you do matches who you are and what you believe. This show is where you'll learn how embracing change and reinventing yourself will help you navigate any disruptions and lead a life of happiness and fulfillment, especially in this ever-changing world. Your purpose and your meaning will drive your personal transformation. As I like to say, it's your vision, your life. Be passionate about it. Reinventing-U starts now. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Reinventing-U on Transformation Talk Radio. I'm your host, Danielle Silverman, and today we're going to be talking about how to reinvent your career. Now, I know you've been wanting to hear this for a long time. I've been hemming and hawing and talking around it, but I never really went in and talked about what are the actual steps that you need to do. So I hope you enjoy this. I certainly enjoyed putting it together. I was going to start this podcast with a lot of technical stuff, things I researched, charts and graphs, really exciting stuff. Yeah, I can see people just rolling their eyes. Don't worry, I stopped myself. Oh, I'm still going to show you some charts and graphs, but not before I share with you what I believe it means to reinvent your career, because I know you've all been waiting for this. So how do you reinvent your career? How do you change direction if you don't know what that direction is? Or how do you go about making the change, even if you do have some idea about the change you'd like to make? What if you're afraid to make that change? But when you work with me, the first thing we do is look at your vision. What is it that you'd like to see happen in your life? We start with the optimistic view, not with the fear. We'll get to the fear eventually, but not before we see the possibilities that are in front of us. The true hope, the light at the end of the tunnel, is to have a vision that is naturally aligned with our deepest values, with our ideals, with our beliefs, and with our most outrageous dreams. We need to go way in the other direction, set the pendulum way on one side, before we bring it more to the center. There's a song in the musical South Pacific. It was in the 1950s sometime. And the song says something like, you have to have a dream, because if you don't have a dream, how can you make a dream come true? Having a vision is about dreaming. It's about giving yourself permission to dream. It's also about imagining that the dream can come true, that it can become real. It's about giving yourself permission to live the dream. That's what Olympic athletes do. They're specifically trained to visualize their dream of finding themselves at the top of the podium. And that's how they get there. Well, it's one way of getting there. Training has a lot to do with it as well. But once your vision is clear, then we explore what it is you need to put in place. What resources do you need? What people, what systems will you need to put in place? And at the same time, we may very well look at those fears that may be holding you back from achieving that vision. I went skydiving once, and at the time I didn't know why I wanted so much to try skydiving. I had wanted it for years, in fact, but I never knew why until years later. And that revealed to me the reason I was so fearful about so many things. So let me share a personal story with you. I was born in Egypt. My paternal grandfather was born in Palestine. His parents fled the pogroms in Russia and traveled by foot over the Ural Mountains and settled in Palestine. You may have heard about this kind of story in history books or or in the famous movie Fiddler on the Roof. My ancestors were rabbis from father to son, but my grandfather had another calling. And he left home at a young age to study biochemistry in Leipzig, Germany. And he later settled in Egypt, where my father was born and where I was born. This was at the end of the 19th century, after the construction of the Suez Canal, and Egypt was booming economically. It was an idyllic life, rich in culture, warm weather, great food, and really kind, warm-hearted people. But all that changed in 1956 when a military coup overthrew the reigning monarchy. Everything was nationalized. And my father was forced to work in a job and a place not of his choosing. Eventually, we were forced to leave the country of my birth, and my father made plans to move us all to Canada. On the eve of our departure, my beloved grandfather, who was traveling with us, fell into a diabetic coma, and he was carried to the plane on a stretcher. I was 3 years old, looking at death in the face for the first time, and I was paralyzed by the experience because the 3-year-old wasn't able to jump from that plane. And that's the reason for so many years I'd wanted to go skydiving, to be able to get out of that plane, that original plane that was so scary. Your story doesn't have to be so dramatic, though. I get that it's scary to change jobs. Sometimes it's just too scary to change lanes. It's too scary to say yes to the opportunity that's right in front of you. Sometimes it's just too scary because we're going into the unknown. We're jumping into the air without necessarily knowing what's on the other side. So instead, we retreat. We delay the deadline. We try not to even think about it. Even if deep down inside, we're dying to try it. We're dying to jump. Whatever the situation, whatever the difficulty or the probability of success. I had a client once who was dying to quit his job, but he was so afraid of the unknown that was in front of him. He kept coming back to what he wanted to do, what he was attracted to, but wasn't sure that he should leave his job. And one day I said to him, "You don't know what you don't know. How will you know if you don't try?" And to my surprise, he made the jump, and he has never regretted it. There is a transition period that you go through, and that transition is the moment in time when you live with that discomfort. Imagine the same kind of discomfort that I was feeling when I was waiting my turn to jump out of a plane at 15,000 feet. It's that moment when we lose all sense of where we are, when we doubt everything. And that's precisely when we need to reinvent ourselves, to accept a new reality, a new way of being, even if it terrifies us, because we know we long for it so much. So often we take pleasure in living in misery. We put up with things, and then we suffer the consequences. We make ourselves believe that it's easier to die little by little rather than taking a risk to go towards something that might be better. The irony is that most of the time we know we're undermining ourselves, but we don't have the tools, the knowledge, or the help we need to move on. When I was 12 years old, I learned a poem that had a very deep impact on me. Some of you may be very familiar with it. It's called Invictus by the English poet William Henley, and I'll never forget the last stanza of that poem. It matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishment the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. For some people, leaving a job that makes us unhappy is not that scary. To them, it's better than the alternative. And that's okay too. To have the courage of one's vision is to be in control of one's own destiny. It's about making choices that are good and right for us and for nobody else. Know that whatever choice you make, it's the right one because you're the one who made it. It's your vision, your life. I think I told this story in one of my previous episodes that when I was 34, I found myself in a very difficult position at work. I had a boss who was constantly asking me to give 130% effort. And I told him that the problem wasn't that I couldn't give him 130%. The problem was that I was currently giving 300%, and I couldn't give any more. Unfortunately, over time, the situation got worse to the point where I just couldn't take it. I was exhausted, both physically and mentally. So I gave myself 3 choices and 6 months to make the decisions. Make the decision, not just one decision. My choices were to look for a job somewhere else, to go back to school, or to sell all of my belongings and travel around the world with a backpack. And at the end of 3 months, my decision was made. I was going back to school. It was, in my view, the decision that had the least risk. And in the end, it turned out to be 2 of the best years of my life. But it took courage. Courage, I believe, is about acknowledging risk and acting in the face of it. In fact, the biggest element of courage is risk. Not the risk involved in jumping or not jumping, whether it's out of a plane or into another direction, but the inherent risk in the choices we make. Because we don't know the outcome. It doesn't matter whether or not you choose to change jobs or anything else in your life. Courage is in the choice you make. Let me say it again. Courage is in the choice you make. But the beautiful thing is that once the decision is made, that's when you start to see your confidence grow. I'll let that sink in. Once the decision is made, that's when you start to see your confidence grow. But most of us do exactly what I did, sitting at the edge of that little plane, about to jump out into nothingness. We doubt. We question the very decision to jump. But somehow, as I sat there at 15,000 feet, I had to evaluate the risk. 2 risks, in fact. The first, of course, that of jumping. But the second risk was to trust someone else. I did a tandem jump, which meant that I was hooked up to an expert skydiver. He was the one wearing the parachute. He was, in fact, my parachute. And I had to entrust him with my life. I could have chosen to do a solo jump, but instead, I chose to associate myself with someone who would ultimately help me make the jump. And this is what you need to do when you're considering changing careers, or anything else for that matter. Find someone with whom to safely make the jump. Someone who has been there before. Someone who can serve as a safety net or a parachute to help mitigate the risks. As a career coach, this is what I do. I have your back. I hold a safe space for you to explore your vision, your fears, and to fly on your own eventually. When you work with me, we'll first tease out that vision of yours using specific exercises designed to help you dream. And then we'll look at the strategies you need to put in place to implement your vision. We'll go from that big pendulum swing to something realistic that you can live with. And along the way, we'll dispel any fears you may have by determining very clearly what you do have control over. And that, I can assure you, is very liberating. Once you've identified the path you want to pursue, we set about implementing it. We actively engage in the process. And here again, I have specific tools that help ensure the success of your plan. But it doesn't end there. You know, I'm constantly talking about the turmoil we live in, the uncertainty and the volatility of the world. What is needed to keep moving is to keep moving. We need to embrace change so that we're constantly evolving with time, not staying stagnant. I used to help people who had been laid off from their jobs, and that has evolved now into helping people who are unhappy in their jobs discover what really drives them. This is a field that is particularly relevant to the world we live in today. Would I have continued to be successful if I had only focused on what I used to do? Perhaps. Perhaps not. In today's world, much of what I used to do is being replaced by online trainings and artificial intelligence that helps you do mock interviews. If I had not evolved, who knows? My job may have become obsolete. I read an article recently that talked about replacing whole human resources departments with artificial intelligence. The whole recruitment process replaced by artificial intelligence. In fact, part of the job search process involves artificial intelligence, which is why we need to be particularly diligent in the documents that we prepare and how we submit them. So it really is vitally important for you to stay up to date and aware of what's going on around you. It's imperative for you to be able to continue to evolve. And I will introduce you to tools that can help with that as well. You're listening to Reinventing-U with Danielle Silverman. If you'd like to discover more about who you are and what your vision might be, please feel free to visit my website at www.reinventingu.com and book a free consultation. When we come back, some of those charts and graphs I said we'd share, because they're also essential to understanding who you are and how to position your vision. But don't worry, I'll try not to make it too boring. See you soon. Welcome back to Reinventing-U. I'm your host, Danielle Silverman, and today we're talking details about how to reinvent your career. I'll say it, I've said it before, I'll say it again. We're living in a world that is increasingly volatile and complex. Every study conducted recently says the same thing. This is the most stressed out and anxious global workforce ever recorded. We're seeing it everywhere, across all industries and all sizes of companies. There's fatigue, burnout, resistance to change. From the point of view of economics, the world is looking really strange. The unemployment rate is relatively low, held up perhaps by a rise in interest rates. And on the other hand, according to the US Labor Statistics Bureau, in their October report, they said that there are 5.7 million unemployed people in the US who want to work. And yet in March 2022, nearly 4.5 million Americans quit or changed positions. and employers posted a record 11.5 million job openings. So, which is it? The unemployment rate is low. There are more jobs available. It's contrary to everything that we've ever learned. What's happening is that workers are leaving in search of an improved work-life balance and flexibility. They're also looking for increased compensation and a strong company culture that fits their own values. And companies are, understandably, starting to look for fixes. But they're quick fixes. Let's implement a meditation mindfulness course for all employees. Let's give people bonuses. Let's hire a massage therapist to come in. Ooh, what great ideas. Wouldn't you love to work there? But the issue is that these are just Band-Aids. We're putting in quick fixes without addressing the root cause of the problem, which is that we're focusing on today without any regard to what might be happening tomorrow. But in order to adapt to a world of changing worker expectations, organizations need to move away from the traditional work and workplace models of the past to a model that's more fluid, more human, with a more digital future in which speed, agility, and innovation are front and center. The danger today is not the new competitor on the block. It's the employees themselves who expect more meaning, more choice, more growth, more autonomy at work. In the last episode of Reinventing-U, I talked about the life cycle of organizations and the implications this had on the work of the future. When you look at a life cycle of an organization, as I have it in this slide, what you see is that the cycle begins, or not, it's not showing the complete bell curve, but you see the curve going up, and then it turns slightly red. At the point where it turns red, this is where the organization is already starting to decline. So if the reinvention is going to happen, it needs to happen before it gets to that top. Because studies have shown that if the reinvention happens after or on the down curve, there's only a 10% chance of success. 10%. So where does the reinvention need to happen? How do we know? And what's the risk if we don't reinvent in time? The risk is we might disappear. The organization might disappear. Our jobs may disappear. The real question is, how do we know when to reinvent? Well, the best time is to reinvent on the up curve. But how do we know precisely which point? You know, which one of these black horizontal lines that are on this up curve, which one of these points is where we need to consider reinventing? The only way to figure that out is to constantly be aware of what's going on. For companies, that means looking for clues in the marketplace, talking to clients and suppliers all the time, looking at economic indicators, communicating with employees. Remember, the employees here are the issue. Well, they're not the issue, they're not a problem, but they are the competitive disadvantage at this point. Companies can also hold meetings like Kill the Company, which are workshops that bring people together to try and anticipate, think about what the future might bring, what might happen in the future, and then come up with ideas on what could be done differently to help the company survive and thrive, not just survive. And one of those very strong clues that something is wrong is definitely the change in worker expectations. In its latest report, Deloitte speaks about these shifts and how companies could adapt, what the world of work will look like as we move towards 2030, which is not that far away. They look at things such as worker expectations and agency, longer lives. There have been books written about the longer life and the implications of that longer life on government institutions, on education, on financial institutions. Deloitte also talks about the human technology collaboration, and they talk about many other issues that will take us on the journey towards a new world of work in 2030. The report Deloitte just published is called The Journey to 2030, Choosing the Human Agenda: 7 Shifts Reshaping Organizations in a Disruptive Decade. And I want to pause a moment to talk about the wording of this title of the report. They talk about what's coming up in the very near future, 2030. They talk about a disruptive environment. And more importantly, in my view, they talk about a human agenda. As individuals, we also need to pay attention to the life cycle curves, because everything has a life cycle. A product has a life cycle. We also have a life cycle. What will happen during our own life cycle? If we don't recognize the need for change early on, what are the repercussions to our careers and to our personal lives? Do we need to wait until we're in burnout? No, by then it's too late. The goal is to try to avoid burnout. So how do we figure out what to look for? Well, as I've said before, the clues are in understanding the world as it is today, but keeping an eye out for what it will be tomorrow, while at the same time having a very, very good understanding of yourself, your needs, your abilities, and your options. This is what will give you agency. You have the power to make things happen. Agency is the sense of control that you feel, your capacity to influence your own thoughts and behavior, and your faith in your ability to handle all kinds of situations. But you do need some information to make that happen. As I shared with you in the previous episode of Reinventing-U, the life cycle of companies is now much shorter than it used to be. When it used to be 75 years, today it's more likely to be in the range of 3 to 5 years, depending on the industry. So what's the implication for us as employees in the workforce? Well, first and foremost, it means that we can't expect to be in a job or working for a company for a very long time, like our parents used to. It also means that it's okay to change jobs often. Once upon a time, when I first started in this kind of work, it used to be frowned upon to see a resume, a CV, with someone who had a change in jobs every 2 or 3 years. Today, it's seen as an advantage. You'll very likely have at least 5 careers in your lifetime, perhaps even as many as 8. I'm on my 6th. That's not even counting all the different things I did for summer jobs. And even that, the latest career, as I said before, is evolving over time. The other things we need to look at include the job market itself, your skills, and your ability to adapt to the changing job market. So I've created my own chart to summarize the thoughts that I have about this. It's about recognizing who you are and where you stand in the overall scheme of things. And it will give you the impetus you need, I hope, to move forward. So what we have here is the state of the job market. At the top, of course, the job market is strong, and at the bottom, in the y-axis, the job market is weak. And across that, along the x-axis, is your adaptability, your skills, your ability to adapt. And to the right-hand side, of course, you have tremendous adaptability. And to the left, you're still living a little bit in yesterday. So let's start with the upper left-hand corner. I call that work is work. It's a combination between a strong job market and relatively low adaptability. If you're in work is work, the rule of success is remaining professional above all. This isn't about quiet quitting. You're remaining at work because you're aware of the fact that there are more important things in your life, and that's where you want to put much of your energy. But your employer still needs to trust that you'll be there to do what's necessary to be productive in your job. But during the pandemic, you also reflected on what was important to you. And you came to the conclusion that staying was the best option for you. That doesn't mean that you don't care about your work or that you don't have an impact on how you're treated at work or on the work itself. And I will speak to that a little bit later on. So the first is top left-hand corner, strong job market, relatively less strong adaptability. Work is work. And the rule of success, staying professional above all. In the top right-hand corner, strong job market, strong adaptability. You have multiple transferable skills. I call this the world is your oyster, because you can leverage your skills to work in whatever environment or industry you choose. Here, my rule of success, remain humble. You have the talent and the opportunities. Don't let them get to your head. But remember that you have all of these options. And so if you're considering leaving your job, know that there will be something out there for you. And so getting to know yourself, getting to understand the true nature of your adaptability and what those skills are, that will be what is important for you. In the lower right-hand quadrant is what I call movement is king. So you've got adaptability, but the job market might not be great. And that, that could be most of the people today who are, unhappy in their jobs. They're adaptable. They want to move, but the job market is not great. When the economy is close to recession, it's often more difficult to find work. So the good news is that you have the skills that make you adaptable to that kind of situation. The other good news is that it's acceptable to move from one job to the other. And in each position, you're going to learn something. And hopefully the reason you're moving is to learn something new. And the rule of success here, according to me, is to make sure you have a clear plan in mind. Don't just jump from one job to the other for the sake of jumping, or simply because you're not happy where you are. Although some people, I understand, their unhappiness is such that they are on the verge of breakdown. And therefore, they probably do need to leave their job. And that's okay. But make sure that whatever you go to next follows a certain path that is clear and that makes sense to you, that you're still learning something towards a particular future, that you have something in mind. And finally, in the bottom left-hand corner is what I call the alternatives. Here again, the job market is poor. Maybe you don't have the technological skills for certain kinds of jobs. Or perhaps your personality is not suited to the corporate world. There's still many opportunities out there that might be the right fit for you. Here, my rule of success is remain flexible. You might have to work more than one job at a time. As a matter of fact, this is a pretty common theme in the job market of tomorrow. We call them slash jobs. Do this, slash that, slash this, slash. As a coach, I have a slash job. I'm a speaker, a trainer, a coach, a writer. They're all different things. All of these four options are compared to the nature of the job market and your own abilities to adapt and to remain flexible. It's about knowing yourself. It's also about understanding that the world is changing. There are a couple of other things that fall into the category of reinventing your career. The first is to take a hard look at the situation you're in now. For example, if you're in the work is work quadrant in the upper left-hand side, good job market, low adaptability or low desire to change, there are still things you can do to ensure that your job has meaning. Perhaps there are some things in your workplace that you believe need to change. How do you go about doing that? You've tried talking to your supervisor. He or she may even agree with you, but may not be willing to do anything. You may have some colleagues who agree with you, but don't know what to do or how to do it. Well, what can you do if you want to affect change? Well, those of you who work in the field of marketing are very familiar, no doubt, with the law of diffusion of innovation. Well, believe it or not, it applies here as well. Because what you need to do is talk to the people who will make that change happen. There needs to be a wave. So you don't talk to the people who agree with you. What here in this chart is the 2.5% of innovators. And you don't talk to the 13.5% of early adopters because they also are in your camp. What you need to do is talk to people who might have a tendency to believe in what you believe, but they probably need to be convinced. And there's a gap between the early adopters and the early majority. There's a tipping point where you speak to the majority of people, the 34% that are likely to move the wave in your direction. So pick out who it is that you need to speak with, because that's how you will affect change. Don't talk to the people who agree with you. Talk to the people who are not saying anything, but may be agreeing with you. And it doesn't matter what level of the organization they're at, because when there's enough of a percentage of people who agree with you, that's when the change will happen. And finally, more important than all of this is your mindset. If you have a fixed mindset, all of these theories won't mean a thing. So what kind of mindset will survive this decade? In the following chart, I've laid out two different kinds of mindset. On the far right-hand side in blue is what I call the reinvention mindset. And that's where the ultimate good means improvement, progress, development, where change is seen as a constant and it's manageable, where the unknown is perceived with curiosity. Curiosity. And where the standard response to change is proactive. You're looking for opportunities, searching for opportunities. And where your personal role as an employee is that change mainly happens with you or by you. On the left-hand side of this chart in red is what I call a fixed mindset. You could also call it a dinosaur mindset or a past mindset or whatever it is you want to call it. Choose which one It is. But you can see here that what I call the fixed mindset is really about fear, about being reactive, about saying, ooh, change happens to me. It's almost about being a victim. And some people, many people, are somewhere in the middle. Maybe it's a purple, neither blue nor red. That's okay too. The important thing is to understand where you are and what kind of mindset you have and what kind of mindset you want to have. That's the important thing. Okay. I've set you up to understand the world we're living in today and what it will be like, most likely, for the rest of this decade. You understand the mindset that's required and your potential in the job market. And I've also shared the beginnings of what it would be like to work with me. So what else is left? When we come back, we'll look at some of the support systems you'll need to put in place if you're thinking about reinventing your career. We'll also look at one of the things most people find the hardest to do, letting go. You're listening to Reinventing-U with Danielle Silverman on Transformation Talk Radio. See you soon. Welcome back to Reinventing-U. I'm your host, Danielle Silverman, talking about what it means to reinvent your career. In the last episode of Reinventing-U, I talked about how to avoid burnout and to remain resilient in the face of constant change and turbulence. I also shared my own personal experience with depression and burnout. One thing that I learned through that experience is the importance of having a strong support system. These include things like friends and family, your social network, your medical support system, including working with a therapist. But another critical factor is finding the right coach to work with to help you define and craft your career reinvention. I urge you to take the time to do some research before you choose someone to work with. Ask questions. Make sure that the fit is right for you. I do the same thing. I make sure that the person I work with is the right fit for my style of coaching. There are specific questions that I ask in our discovery call that will enlighten me as to whether or not a person is ready to do the hard work that it takes to effect such a major change in their life. Because it is a major change, and it is hard work. My role is to support you through the process, to be there when it gets tough, to hold a safe space, one where you feel comfortable enough to say anything. I'm there to understand your challenges and to cheer you on. I'm there to be your tandem during the jump to a different direction. I know a lot of people who decide to do this work on their own, and I take my hat off to them. I personally would not be able to do that, just as I would not have been able to get through depression without the support of a therapist, nor would I have been able to jump out of a plane without the support of my tandem partner. But if you do decide to go it alone, there are things you can look for. Remember that what you're primarily going to do is figure out who you are. You may be thinking, what is she talking about? I know who I am. I'm sure you do. And you need to know yourself even better than that, and in greater detail. It's the only way you're going to be able to figure out what is right for you. And by the way, it's also the best way to prepare for interviews. So how do you do that? How do you get to know yourself? Ask questions. Ask questions of your colleagues, of your mentors. Ask your friends, your family, what do people come to you for? What are you known for? If you're in a corporate environment, in a leadership position, you might have had 360 assessments where your colleagues and direct reports get to give their feedback on who you are. Asking questions is very powerful. You need to remember, however, that very often when people are quote unquote giving feedback, it's a lot about them and not necessarily about you. So do take it with a grain of salt. But it's still important to ask questions. It's in particular, think about what people come to you for. What are you known for? What do you help them with? What do you enjoy helping them with? The other thing you can do is look at personality or career assessments. And there's a lot of free stuff out there. The first one I direct you to would be something called ONET Online. And it's called an interest profile. I don't know if we're able to put the website up there, but it's mynextmove.org/explore/IP for interest profile. mynextmove.org/explore/IP, which stands for interest profile. This is a free resource. You do the test and it gives you your score on 6 different areas: realistic, investigative, artistic, social, entrepreneurial, or conservative. It's the same as a test called the Strong Interest Inventory, which is not free. So why not use ONET Online? It's a US resource. And it's quite comprehensive. And what the beautiful thing about ONET is afterwards, it takes the 3 highest scores from the 6 that it looks at. And then it outlines for you what careers are generally chosen by people who have scored the same way you have. Maybe not the same numbers, but the same 3 areas. And then it goes into each of these professions, each of these careers, and it tells you the level of education you need for each one of these careers. And it tells you exactly what tasks are being done and what the job requirements are. So it's absolutely brilliant. When you look at it, it tells you level of education 1 is very low level of education. Level 5 generally means it needs a master's or a PhD. And then you click, it's a link. You click on that profession and it'll tell you everything about it. The important thing to remember here is that you're looking at generalities. There may be careers that are being created today that never existed before. So look at these with an open mind and say, okay, what is similar that I might find interesting? Maybe it's not that specifically, but maybe it's something that is in the similar category. I think this is a fantastic resource. And as I said, if you're working with a coach, sometimes the Strong Interest Inventory is just as good. And you can match the Strong Interest Inventory with a personality test. The one I like to use is called Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, or MBTI. That one is not free, but I don't think it doesn't really cost all that much. It's important to understand your personality as well. And there are other tests, things like the Enneagram or the DISC, which is extremely popular. And most coaches are trained in how to interpret all of these tests. The other things you could do is look at something called VIA Character Strengths, which is also free. viacharacter.org. Look them up and they'll talk about their free assessment right away. And it says character strengths, but I think it's also very close to values. So that's a very important thing to do. The other thing you can do is look up, Gallup has something called the Clifton Strengths Assessment. That's gallup.com/Clifton Strengths. Several years ago, the president of Gallup, Donald Clifton, wrote this book called Now Discover Your Strengths. And it lists all of these strengths. So you can go out and buy the book. And actually, and I think it's still true, when you buy the book, there is a code inside that allows you to go on the website and get the strengths assessment for free. So you can either pay for the assessment or you can go out and buy the book, and it'll give you the details of all of the strengths and what they mean. What else can you do? Of course, I firmly believe that you need someone by your side to help you interpret all of these assessments. You need someone who's trained in how to work with them, who understands their value and who also understands their limitations, because there are limitations. Something else you can do is to figure out what motivates you. So what is a motivation? Material gain can be motivation, power, influence, your search for meaning, your search for accomplishment, creativity, your need for belonging and affiliation, or autonomy, security, status. All of these could be things that motivate you. So what you can do is look at these drivers and rate each one of them out of 10. And the ones that you score the highest, are your main drivers. The other thing you could do is define what your core values and beliefs are. Above all, to do this, to take ownership of what you believe in your core. And there's a great tool out there called the Barrett Values Assessment, which is also free. It's valuescenter.com. And I think there's a link to tools and assessments there. The Barrett Values Assessment looks at 7 different levels of consciousness, from survival to relationships, to self-esteem, to transformation, internal cohesion, making a difference, and finally service, selfless service. It's sort of like the Maslow hierarchy of needs, but taken to basic values. And what's interesting is that they provide you with a list of 10 values that are important to you specifically. And then they give you an exercise to do. They tell you that from the 10 values that were chosen, think about the 3 that are most important to you and write them down. And then ask yourself, why do you believe that the value is important to you? And then recall a moment in your life when you really lived this value. What behaviors did you exhibit that supported this value? And then how might you react if this value was being honored by others or being not honored by others? How would you feel? Describe your feelings, describe your thoughts, describe what actions you might take. It's a tremendous exercise. I used to do a values exercise with my clients. It was a little bit different. I provided a list of values. It could have been 2 or 3 pages long. And then I asked, what is your definition of that value? Not the dictionary definition. What is your definition of that value? And then I asked, is this value important to you? And finally, I asked, is this value present or absent at work? That's very revealing, because that's when people understood that they didn't have that value at work. What's the difference between values and motivation? They're all a way to get what you believe, to get to what you believe in and who you are. Technically, motivation is something that will call you to action, whereas the value is the quality, either positive or negative, that drives you to action. The other thing I want you to consider is self-reflection, being self-aware. So write in a journal, or join a journaling circle. Join or create a reflection circle and read more. Keep reading. Above all, it's important to be honest with yourself. And finally, it's important to recognize when it's time to let go of what no longer serves you. I had a client who came to see me because he was very unhappy in his job, but he stayed on, terrified to leave or to try something new. Mostly, he was afraid of leaving because of the security his job provided. He didn't think he'd be able to find something that provided as much security. At what cost? He was supremely unhappy. So I don't believe in coincidences. As soon as he had the courage to talk about this, the doors opened for him. They opened wide. So he let go. And letting go is not something that happens with huge fanfare. We let go in little pieces. It takes recognizing that there might be something else. Even if your vision isn't clear, that's okay. We simply need to bring it back into focus. And it isn't always necessary to change completely. Sometimes all we need is a little adjustment. But in every case, we must let go of something. As you go through your day today, I want you to notice what you're thinking. Are you avoiding thinking about the choices that are facing you today and for the rest of your life? One thing is certain, you're not done making decisions, regardless of how old you are. What are the thoughts in your head that are holding you back? The thing I hear most is, I have no idea what I want, or I'm afraid. I'm afraid. Whether you're going through large shifts in your life or tiny little tune-ups, I recommend you work with someone to get you through the adjustments and the fear of going into the unknown. And bear in mind that letting go is also about being authentic to yourself. Brené Brown, in her book, The Gifts of Imperfection, defines authenticity as the daily practice of letting go of who we think we're supposed to be and embracing who we are. Reinventing you happens when what you do matches who you are. Thanks for listening today. If you'd like to chat with me about how you can reinvent yourself, please visit my website at www.reinventing-u.com. There you can send me a message, an email, or even book a free call directly on my calendar. I look forward to hearing from you. Until next time, this is Reinventing-U with Danielle Silverman, helping you reinvent your career. Thank you for listening to Reinventing-U with me, your host, Danielle Silverman. Tune in on the second and fourth Monday each month at 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific on transformationtalkradio.com. Join me and feel inspired and optimistic about your future. We only get one life, so embrace change and thrive with me. Find work that aligns best with your soul and what you enjoy. For more information, go to reinventingu.com.